All right. Good evening. Sorry for the change in venue. Upstairs in one of the bedrooms of my children here hiding. Everyone's well, just waiting on a COVID test, and in the meantime, staying safe, davening at home and learning at home. So we're going to get started tonight. We're going to be learning Daf Pei Aleph, and we're actually going to go over to Pei Beis Amud Aleph and finish up the parak, and we'll stop there. The new parak opens with a pretty fast-moving sugya. So even though it leaves me with an extra half an amud for Shabbos, but it will be pretty fast-moving, so we should be fine. So tonight is Pei Aleph, and also Pei Beis Amud Aleph up to the end of the parak in Yirtzeh Hashem. We're going to get started with a new Mishnah at the bottom of Daf Pei Amud Beis. This new Mishnah should ring a bell. We learned about this sugya many months ago, and we're going to raise the fact that it was already mentioned once, and why is it that it had to be mentioned again? And that is, what are some of the things that are allowed to be used for actually making the Eruv itself? And here the Mishnah opens, Pei Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom, at a new Mishnah, B'kol me'arvin u'mishtatven chutz min hamayim u'min hamelach divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that one can make an Eruv out of anything with the exception of water and salt. We learned much earlier in the Maseches in the Kafs. One of the things that we learned is because those things are not zun. Those things provide no sustenance. In contrast to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kikar Hu Eruv. You need to use a full and whole loaf of bread. Afilu ma'afeh sa v'hu prusa. If you made a whole massive sa, a huge amount of challah, you made a massive challah. You know the ones that you see at the weddings are like 3-foot long challahs that are fully braided with a 6 braid, a chashav azach, but it's cut into pieces. Says that there says the Mishnah. Afilu ma'afeh sa v'hu prusa. If it's cut into pieces, ein ma'arvin ba. And on the flip side, it's also true. Kikar, ki-isar, if you have a full loaf, but it's tiny, like a mini roll, like you might see at a shal d'shudas, or even smaller. So then, v'hushalem, if it in fact it is full, so then me'arvin bo, then the halacha is that it does count as an eruv. So if you just look at these two shittas of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, there really is a very big contrast. Rabbi Eliezer seems to be very inclusive, all things except for water and salt. And Rabbi Yoshua seems to be extremely limited in that he only allows for a whole loaf of bread. They're really the polar opposites. It's a very extreme difference between the two. And let's analyze that as we turn to the top of Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, and the Gemara opens. And it opens with the question that we should all be thinking, which is Tanina Chada Zimna. We saw this already. And if you look at the Mari Mekomos that are listed here, B'kol me'arvin u'mishtatven chutz min hamayim v'hamelach, that was quoted Le'el Kaf Vav Amud Aleph. And if we flip back over there, that's what we learned 60 blot ago. We saw this idea already 55 blot ago. So why say the same thing twice? So the Gemara tries with the following answer. Amar Rabba le'afuke mid Rabbi Yoshua, the Amar kikarin midi acharina lo, kamash malon bakol. What we are doing here, the reason why we repeated this shita of mayim umelach lo, the reason why we had it once on Daf Kavav and now here again on Daf Pei Amud Beis in the Mishnah was to make sure that we knew with clarity that we're rejecting the shita of Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua is no longer a viable option. And what does it mean, Kamash Malon Bakol, the 4th line of the Gemara there? So let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi on the 2nd line there, Rashi says, after the Dibur Hamaschel, Rashi says, Afilu Yainu Peros, meaning we don't paskin like Rabbi Yoshua at all in regards to bread. Bread is just not the only option. It can't be water and can't be salt, but it can be a lot of other things. So that's why the Gemara says that we repeat ourselves. Asks the Gemara, Esive Abaye. Abaye quotes a brisa, and the brisa says as follows: Bakol me'arvin eruvi chatzeros ubachol mishtatven shitufe mavuos. One can seemingly bakol. You can be ma'arv with anything for eruvi chatzeros and for shitufe mavuos. V'lo amru la'arev bepas ela bechatzer bilvad. But when do we say that you're only allowed to be ma'arv with bread? That's only true in a chatzer. Okay, that's a contradiction from the Reisha to the Seifa, because in the Reisha it says Bakol ma'arvin be'eruv chatzeros, and in the end it says it's only in bread. So asks the Gemara on this brisa, Man shamasle, who is the one who would normally say de amar pas in midya charina lo? Who is the man de amar who seems to be the one who would hold that bread is allowed to make an eruv, but no other items are allowed? Answers the Gemara with the obvious answer, really quoting from our Mishnah. That's Rabbi Yoshua. But says the Gemara, Vikatani bakol. But at the Reisha of this brisa, it also says that you can be ma'ariv with everything. So which one is it? do we say that you can be ma'ariv with only bread, or is it bakol? So it says the Gemara, Ella Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, what was the reason why we repeated the Gemara of Bakol Ma'arvun Mishtas Chutz Min Amayim Min Amelch Le'afuke Mid Rabbi Yoshua? Yes, it's true to exclude the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua, but not as we did before to say that the Tanakama would hold that not only is bread allowed, but fruits and vegetables are allowed, but rather, says the Gemara, Le'afuke Mid Rabbi Yoshua in the following way. To Amar, what does Rabbi Yoshua hold? He holds the Amar Shlema in Prusalo, that when the loaf of bread is full, that's when it can be used for an Eruv. However, Prusalo, if it's cut into pieces, it cannot be used for an Eruv. Kamash Malan Bakol. And what does the line of Bakol come to teach us? The line of Bakol comes to teach us that the Tanakama, in this Brisa at least, and not the same as in our Mishnah, but the Tanakama is of the opinion that we are also allowed to use sliced bread, but we're not allowed to use whole bread. So asks the Gemara, what is all of this about? Who cares if the loaf is a whole bread, or if you have you have your classical bag of sliced white bread and everyone takes a piece and everyone's ma'ared? What is the big deal? I don't understand. So says the Gemara, Uprusa my taimolo. What was the reason why Rabbi Yoshua was so makbid that you can only use a kikar, you can only use a whole loaf of bread, but you couldn't use sliced bread in order to make an eruv? Answers the Gemara very, very uniquely. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rabbi, Mishum Eva. Mishum Eva. Eva is a halachic principle that is employed typically between Jews and non-Jews, where we're concerned about a negative reaction. So therefore, we may extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone in order to ensure that relationships stay safe between us and the Umos HaOlam. However, that's not the interactions here. The interactions here is to make an Eruv among other Yidden. So what is this talking about, Eva? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi's almost halfway down the page. Dibur Hamaschil Mishum Eva. Rashi says, Sheboin Lidei Machlokes, Sheomer Anino Sein Shlema Ve'ata Prusa. Everyone's going to show up and they're going to be bringing their donation to make the Eruv. You bring a whole loaf of bread, and I'm a cheapskate, and I bring one slice from a loaf of bread. So the Gemara is concerned, Mishum Eva, that it's going to cause for a degree of machlokes between people, and because that's the case, so we therefore are going to make sure that everyone does the same exact thing. That's why Rabbi Yoshua is so makbid. Back in the Gemara, okay, well, if that's the concern, that you're afraid some people may bring a kikar, a whole loaf, and some people may bring a prusa, some people may bring a slice of bread, well, then let's test the limits here. Amar le Rav Acha b'rei de Rava le Rav Ashi, irvu kulan v'prusos mahu. What if everybody shows up and everybody brings a slice of bread? Shouldn't that work? If your whole concern is Eva, your concern is that I may bring a slice of bread when you bring a loaf of bread, and you're going to be frustrated by the fact that you had to invest more than I did, tell everyone to bring a slice of bread, and Shalom al Yisrael, it'll be fine. There will be no Eva, there will be no machlokes at all. So it says the Gemara, that does not work. Amar le, Shema Yachzer Davar Lekilkula, we're afraid that one guy will show up with a kikar, with a loaf of bread, and therefore there will be a degree of frustration there, because I only showed up with a prusa, but you showed up with a kikar, and you might be annoyed. Why is Phil being a cheapskate? So therefore, we don't allow for that to happen. Amar Rav Yochanan ben Shaul, nitla hemena kedei chalasa uchedei dimua me'arvin loba. The din is, let's say that a person already made their challah and they forgot to be mafresh the challah. So now, in order to be able to eat all of the challah, you have to be mafresh, which means you have to tear a chunk out of one of the challahs that is a shalem. So now, are you allowed to use that challah, which now has a tear from it because you tore out your challah, or your dimua? That's a case where you have chulin and truma mixed in, and in order for you as a zar, as a Yisrael, to eat it, you have to remove some to ensure that the kohen has what he needs, and that matirs you to eat whatever's left. So whatever the point is that you're tearing out a chunk of the challah, does that work? So here we have a quote from Rav Yochanan ben Shaul, and it says there, ma'arvin lo ba. So it seems that both in the case of challah and in the case of meduma, that one is allowed to use a challah for an eruv where there's a chunk torn out for the sake of challah or being meduma, or making sure that it's kosher to eat. So says the Gemara, almost halfway down, Tanya, I agree. We have a brisa that agrees with a part of what you said, Rav Yochanan, that it says, it's true that when you're dealing with bread that is meduma, a mix of chulin and truma, there, when you tear out a chunk, it's fine, and you can still use it to be ma'ariv. But we have a din that when the bread that you are tearing out of is because of challah, there we don't allow it. So we have a contradiction in sources here. Do we allow for a challah from which challah had not been nifrash, and now you need to do it after it's baked. So you tear out a piece of that challah, and then you want to use it as your eruv. So there we have a machlokes. Answers the Gemara lo kashya ha bechalas nachtom. Ha bechalas balabais. It depends. One is talking about the chalas nachtom. We're going to learn in a moment what the shiurim are, but a nachtom, a baker, his share for challah is 1 part to 48 parts. Masha'en Kain, the balabais, is 1 part to 24 parts. So we allow for it to work in the case of the nachtom. We don't allow for it to work in the case of the balabais. And let's see the Mari Makomos that support this. Says the Gemara, Ditnan, halfway down, Shi'urei challah. How much does one need to be mafresh challah? Says the Gemara, Echad me'esrim ve'arba. And who is in this category of 1 to 24 parts, or 1 of 24 parts? Ha'oseh isa le'atzmo, the isa lemishtebeno, someone who makes challah for themselves, or they make it for their son's simcha. So then echad me'esrim ve'arba, those are the people who take 1 unit against 23 others. Nachtom shu osa limkor b'shuk. If you have a baker and his goal is to sell them in the shuk, or v'chein ha'isha, a woman who is making challah, but she's not making challah only for her family. V'asasa she started her own business. She sells challah out of her home. So there we'd say echa me'arba'im v'shmona. Nowadays, our minhag to be mafresh challah is not even to measure. Nowadays, when someone makes challah, they take the appropriate volume of weight, I should say, of 5 pounds of flour, and they make challah. We're mafresh, but we're only mafresh a mashu. We don't even measure. Even the machmer sheet of a balabais of 1 to 24, that we don't even do that because we're not giving it to anyone. It's kind of like a heker ledavar, so we're not actually mafresh the appropriate amount, as it were, because it's not going to anyone. Nevertheless, that is that Gemara, and it concludes for us that there are times that we allow for a challah that's not a shalem in order to be used for an eruv, as long as the reason why it's not shalem is because you tore out a piece for the sake of challah, if it's going to be by a nachtom, or even by the sake of meduma, where you have a mixture of truma and chulin, and you tore some out to make sure that you, as a non-Kohen, would be able to eat it. This brings us to a very interesting case. I was going to bring as an example, but I don't like having food upstairs in my house. But here's the example, nevertheless. Amar Rav Chizda, tifre bekisem me'arvin loba. Let's say you have a challah you have a challah roll that's torn into 2 pieces, and you stick a skewer through it to make it look shalem. Does that work? Tifre really means to stitch, right? To be tofer. So you basically are reconnecting the kisem. You put a stick in each half of the challah, and now that you stick them together, you put a toothpick in the middle. Now they stick together. It looks like a shalem. So that's what the Gemara wants to know. Does that work? And the Gemara says tifre in the name of Rav Chizda, tifre bekisem me'arvin loba. That does work. We have another brisa that seems to say that when you use a stick to connect the 2 halves of the broken loaf into one, that it does not work as an eruv. So says the Gemara, and it's a somewhat lamdush idea, not so deep, but a little bit. Lokashya, ha diyadia tifra, ha delo yadia tifra. It depends if you can see it. Because remember what we said earlier. What was the whole reason why we needed to do a shalem? So the Gemara said it was because of Ava. We're afraid that if I bring a prusa and you bring a kikar, you're going to be frustrated. But if the guy who doesn't know that your kikar is really 2 broken pieces that are just stuck together with a toothpick in the middle, as long as it's not a whole full-length skewer with a tiny roll in the middle, he'll be like, come on, you're trying to pull the wool over my eyes. That's ridiculous. So, but when you can't see it, so that's the distinction in the brises. When the brisa says you're allowed to be ma'arev by connecting them with a stick, that's when the stick doesn't protrude from the challah. It's allowed because there's no ava in that case. No one's going to be frustrated. No one's going to know. But where the stick extends beyond the sides of the challah, and everyone will know that you connected 2 broken pieces of challah into one. So that's the brisa that says that you're not allowed to connect them. We're about 2/3 of the way down. The Gemara says, Amar Reb Zera, Amar Shmuel, me'arvin bepas ores ubepas dochan. One is allowed to use bread, rice bread, or millet bread. That's permissible. These are the types of grains that we would not consider to be the chameshes mine dagan. We know that as it relates to challah for Pesach, as it relates to challah for Shabbos, you have to use challah that's made from barley, rye, oat, wheat, and spelt. The acronym BROWS, easier to remember that way. Those are the types of flour that work. Now, rice was, we always know that rice is probably the exclusive anomaly as it relates to, I think quinoa created the biggest stir since rice, as it relates to the halachos of brachos, because the halacha is that we do make a mizonos on rice, but the after bracha, the bracha achrona there is borei nefashos. So it's anomalous that it's dichotomies a little bit, that you have the bracha on the one hand that seems to be a mazon, but the bracha achrona, you don't get to make an alamichya on it, and it cannot, of course, be used for Pesach, it can't be used for Shabbos. What is unique here is that we are allowing for rice flour to be used, and we are allowing for millet flour to be used for the sake of an eruv. Amar Mar Ukva, not everyone agrees. Shmuel argued on this shita. It's not argued on this shita, it was his own shita. If you look above two lines, Amar Rav Zera, Amar Shmuel. Rav Zera quoted in the name of Shmuel. And now look at the next line. Amar Mar Ukva, Ledidimi for Shali Mine Demar Shmuel, Bepas Ores Me'arvin, Bepas Dochan Ema Arvin. So machlokas within Shmuel, just as Talmidim, we would say Trei Amoroi Aliba de Shmuel is probably the language of the Gemara, that style, because there was a machlokas as to how to understand Shmuel in regards to whether or not we allow millet bread, millet flour that's made into bread. Either way, Amar Rav Chia bar Avin, Amar Rav me'arvin bepas adashin. If one were to take lentils and grind them up and turn that into flour and make bread out of that, we can be ma'ariv with that. Eini, is that true? We're allowed to do that? Says the Gemara, 12 lines up from the bottom approximately. There was someone who made this type of bread during the years of Shmuel. And Shmuel threw this bread to his dog, velo achla. And the dog didn't even eat it. It was so disgusting to have bread made out of adash and bread made out of lentil flour. It was disgusting. He didn't even eat it. So what do you mean you can be ma'ariv b'pas? It has to be something that's roy lachila b'chlal. You have to be able to eat it. And we know the dog is the prototype. That's what we say by Pesach, is if it's not roy lachilas kelev, then you should be fine. So why here do we say that adashim are acceptable? Because in the times of Shmuel, they never, even the dog wouldn't eat the flour that was made, the bread that was made from adashim. So answers the Gemara, Hahi de she'ar minim havya. It was a mixed bag of different types of flour. That's why the dog didn't eat it. Adashim on its own maybe would have been fine, but everything else that you had in your maybe you were trying to give it to the dog by Pesach. You dumped all the different types of flour into one, you baked it, and you gave it to the dog. He wasn't interested. It didn't taste good. But maybe Adashim alone would have been fine, just that here we had more flour. There's a pasuk that indicates that this could have happened. So we see that this exists, and maybe as a text proof, although not, of course, the same case. It far predated Shmuel. It's a pasuk in Tanakh. But nevertheless, Shmuel said that maybe what we're talking about here is a case where the flour had many different ingredients, just like this particular pasuk. Rav Papa Amar, no, this is actually quite gross. They under very pressing times in Klal Yisrael, they would make the burning coals out of feces of a human being, and they would use that to heat the food, and it's disgusting. And that's what they would. Of course, the dog wasn't going to eat that. And there's a pasuk here as well from Sefer Yechezkel. The pasuk says, "Dechsiv." The pasuk reads. I'll read the beginning of the pasuk. The first three words are missing, but may as well read the whole pasuk if we can. It says, "V'ugas seorim tochalena, v'hi begelalei tseas ha'adam teugena le'einehem." So that's the pasuk here. And the pasuk here indicates that it was made from tzoas adam, which is, of course, the reason why the dog wasn't interested. But had it been baked under regular circumstances, then maybe the dog would have eaten the adashim. So we do support the idea that one can still make an eruv out of flour made from adashim, from lentils. Mai ve'ugas seorim tochlena. Why does the pasuk reference specifically seorim, barley? If you want to say that it was adashim, why does it say seorim? So Amar Rav Chizda l'shiurim. It didn't mean seorim. It meant l'shiurim, that people would measure out even this disgusting food that was cooked over coals of fecal matter. It was this time of starvation. They would measure it out in small. You can only eat so much because we have to make sure that you have enough food to meet out over the course of the famine. Rav Papa Amar, arivasa ke arivas seorim velo ke arivas chitim. It wasn't made nicely. It was made like seorim, like barley bread in its shape, but not in what it was made out of. And that was not a nice shape. And a revas chitim was made, Rashi here points out, made in a circle. This is actually one of the sources that people use, that making challahs in a circle is like a shmak thing. People usually do it by Rosh Hashanah time. So, okay, there's a Rashi here that indicates this just to the right. If you look at the last few words of Rashi, Dibur hamaschal arevasa ke arevas seor, and he says there, shemiapet tikun ha'uga agula v'na. When it's circular, it has a very beautiful shape. So that brings us to the next Mishnah. And if we were to summarize, we would say that there is a machlokas here, both in our Mishnah and in the Brisa, between between Rabbi Yoshua and the Tanakama. Do we allow a sliced bread? Do we only allow a kikar? We learned a little bit about that. We asked, what if you connect bread with a twig? We said that it's fine as long as it's not noticeable. We said that the shear, if you tear out challah, it's also going to be permissible under certain circumstances, but maybe not others. Only if it's a nachtom, it's 1/48th, but not 1/24th. And a few other sugyas therein, and that we're allowed to use various types of flours as well in order to be ma'arev, be it millet or rice, that would be fine, and maybe even adashim. The next Mishnah is going to speak about how simple it is to make an eruv in partnership. No sein adam ma lechenveni ulanachtom kadei sheyizke lo eruv divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Let's say that you have a store, you sell items, and I go into your store and I want to give you money, and I buy bread from you, or I buy something from you, and I say, by the way, when they come to buy the bread with which to make the eruv, please include me. So Rabbi Eliezer says that works. But the Chachamim omrim lo zachu lo ma'osav, that doesn't work at all. Rashi, why doesn't it work according to the Chachamim? This is a very important Rashi because it highlights what underlies this machlokes between the Tanakama, between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. This is Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil, Lo zachu lo ma'osav. Why does it not work if I shop at your store? Because she'ein ma'os, says Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil lo zachu lo ma'osav. Rashi says she'ein ma'os konos ad sheyimshoch. Huge machlokes in the Gemara and in the Rishonim. When I give you money, is that itself a kinyan, or do I also need to do a mashicha, some type of kinyan separate of the transaction of money? So, like, let's say that I send you money through Venmo. Let's say that's considered giving you money. That's itself a shaila, right? The post can write, what happens if you pay someone with a check? Is that considered like I've already received the money? Yes or no? Fine. Let's say Venmo is a perfect example. So I Venmo you money right now for a product. I didn't do a Maisa Kinyan and you didn't do a Maisa Kinyan. And then the product that I bought burned in your property. It got ruined, but I paid for it already. So does that work? So that's kind of where we're touching on, is do we include in the world of Kinyan that where I've given you money, but I've yet to do a Kinyan Mashicha. So the Chachamim here clearly hold, based on Rashi. Take a look at the Rashi again. She'ein ma'os konos ad sheyimshoch. You have to do a Kinyan Mashicha. Ve'afilu irev hachen v'ni hazeh l'chol ha'acherim v'zika gam lazeh. Even if he had specific intention, he was mezakeh for the whole community, and was mezakeh, tried to be mezakeh for me too, it doesn't work. Eino eruv, it doesn't work. Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom. Sharei lo niskaven liskos lo b'matnas chinam. Klape me, I gave you money. So you weren't thinking about me as a matnas chinam, as a gift. I gave you money. So I wasn't included in your intention. All right, so that's why the Chachamim, they were of the opinion that the matana, the ma'os that you gave were not koneh, because there was no kinyan meshicha. Good. Turning to the top of Daf Pei Aleph, Amud Beis. Let's see where we are timing-wise. Good. So it says the Gemara as follows. Umodim b'she'ar kol ha'adam. The Chachamim would agree with Rabbi Eliezer that this would work, provided that the person you were giving it to wasn't the owner of a store. It was Sha'ar Kol Adam, a regular person. We'll see in the Gemara. Take a look at the top Rashi, Mefarish Gemara Bal Habayis. It's a regular guy. If I go to your house, then that works. That works because we'll see in the Gemara why it works. But here the Gemara says, "Umodim b'Sha'ar Kol Ha'adam shezachu lo ma'osav she'in ma'arvin la'adam." That when we are going to be ma'ariv, it has to be the daito shel adam. And when by the nachtom in the first part of the Mishnah, where Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim argue, the mindset of the person doing the eruv was matnas chinam, was to do it for free for others, and you're not matnas chinam because you gave me money, so you weren't here by a friend. We don't have that concern. Amar Rabbi Yehuda potentially arguing that we're going to spend the last part of today discussing this line of the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'med dvarim amurim. When is it that we have this discussion? That's true be'eruvei tchumen. It's only true by Tchum Shabbos. However, aval be'eruvei chatzeros me'arvin l'daito v'shelo l'daito. We by eruvei chatzeros, we don't care whether or not you we don't even care if you care. If we're going to be ma'ariv even against your das, no problem at all. That's what the Gemara says. The Mishnah says me'arvin l'daito v'shelo l'daito lefi, because shezachin la'adam shelo b'fanav ve'in chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. That when we do something for someone, we are allowed to transact on behalf of another person when it's to their benefit. And ve'ein chavin la'adam, we are not allowed to transact when it is not to that person's benefit. Major klal and shas will come up dozens and dozens of times in Mir Hashem over the next almost 7 years as we get through shas. A very important principle that applies in a variety of cases. Opens the Gemara with a question. I understand the sheets of the Chachamim. If you tell me that when I give you money, but I don't do a kinyan meshicha, that no kinyan took place, I got you. But then why is it that Rabbi Eliezer said that the kinyan worked when I gave the person money? So that's what the Gemara is opening. My time at the Rabbi Eliezer, hello Mashach. Rabbi Eliezer, you can't have it both ways. Either there wasn't a kinyan or you did Mashicha. But you can't say that without doing a Mashicha that there was a kinyan, if that's the din. So that's what the Gemara asks. And the Gemara answers a little bit of a lengthy answer. We'll learn the answer and then I'll connect it back to our Gemara. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avahu, Asahu Rabbi Eliezer Kedalet Prakim B'Shana. Rabbi Eliezer compares our Mishnah, our case, to a case of what's referred to as Daled Prakim B'Shana. Ditnan, says the Mishnah. B'Daled Prakim B'Shana, 4 times a year, Mashchiten es hatabach al bal korcho. We force the shochet to do shchita. What are these 4 times? Says the Gemara, says Rashi, there are 2 Rashis that say B'Daled Prakim, it's the second one, so it's about an inch below where we are. Rashi says, Dibra Maschel B'Daled Prakim Elu, B'Perek Oso Ve'Espino, a famous parak in Maseches Chulin, Erev Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, that's day 1 of the 4, Ve'erev Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, before Shavuos, Ve'erev Rosh Hashanah is 3, Ve'erev Yom Tov Achron Shel Chag, and possibly the Erev Yom Kippur and Big Alil, right? The possible 5th one that was added in there. And all of these days, that is a time when it is appropriate for someone to have food. So even if the shochet is not in the mood, we don't care. We override the general rule that he doesn't have to sell, and we force him to sell. Okay, you can already see somewhat of a comparison to our case. Let's go back into the Gemara. Ditnan, 7 lines down. Ditnan. The Mishnah writes, B'Daled Prakim Elu, during these times when we are all supposed to have basar by Shabbos, Mashchita, and these Yamim Tovim, Mashchita es hatabach bal korcho, we force the shochet to do shchita, afilu shor shave 1,000 dinar. Even if you have a full cow worth 1,000 dinar, ve'ein lilokeach ela dinar echad. He only wants one tiny little piece of basar. The din is that we force on those 4 days a year, we force kofen oso lishchot. Lefichach, therefore, im mes, if after, and this is the nuance, if after I give you my dinar, your cow dies, and therefore because it dies, you can't eat the meat, it dies, that's a nevela, that's possibly a treifa, certainly a nevela. If the animal dies, you can't eat it. So what happens to the dinar that I invested? I didn't do a kinyan necessarily, did I? I don't know, we'll have to see. So the Gemara says here, im mes lilokeach, the death falls on the buyer. It's as if we assume that the buyer gave his money and now he loses out. So it says the Gemara, Meis lelokeach, why does the burden of the death fall on the lokeach? Hello, mashach. Right? This is back to our Gemara. He didn't do a meshicha. He gave the money for the cut of the shoulder, but he didn't get any cut of the shoulder. The animal died before anything happened. Why does the liability fall back on the purchaser if he didn't do a meshicha? Hooray. We learn this din that the Chachamim articulated with Rashi's help, that there's no kinyan without meshicha when you're talking about money. Hello, Mashach, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, you're right. It must be Bishem Mashach. It must be that the reason why in this Mishnah we place the financial liability on the buyer is because he must have done a kinyan meshicha. So what did he do? He gave a dinar to the person. He took the reins of the animal and he pulled the animal a little bit to walk, and that functioned as a kinyan. Says the Gemara, it can't be. It can't be that there was a meshicha because the seif of that Mishnah doesn't work. Because, says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down. Ihachi, if what you're saying is true, aim a seifa, the seifa doesn't make sense because the seifa says about that same shochet that b'she'ari mos hashana, throughout the rest of the year, minus these 4 episodes, eino kain. The din is not that way. Lefichach, therefore, what it means, eino kain, is we cannot force him to do shchita. Lefichach, therefore, imeis, during the year, if I give over money to the shochet and the animal dies, imeis meis mocher. But says the Gemara, amai. Why? Why would that make any sense? Hamashach, that doesn't make any sense. It's his animal. The other person paid. If you're saying that in the Reisha there was a Mashicha, then in the Seifa there was a Mashicha. And if in the Seifa there was a Mashicha, then why does it fall onto the Shochet? The other person made it kinyan proper. He gave money and he did Mashicha. So you can't say that the Reisha is Mashach and the Seifa is Lo Mashach. It says the Gemara, Amar Rav Shmuel, you're right. Really, this whole Mishnah is talking about where there was no Mashicha. And how then do we understand if there was no Mashiach? Then let's go back to the ratio. If there's no Mashiach, then why is the lokech the one who's liable for the animal? So it says the Gemara as follows: Hacha b'maya skinan. What must we be dealing with? B'shezichalo al yedei acher. It must be that someone else was mezakeh. B'dalid prakim elu dischosulo. During these 4 times of the year when we force the shochet, then it's a someone can be mezakeh for you because zachan lo shelo b'fanav, because of the principle we saw in our Mishnah of zachan ladam shelo b'fanav. So someone else was mezakeh for you, and that's why you're the financially liable one, because I'm going to be mezakeh for you for this 1 pound of flesh because it's zachan ladam shelo b'fanav, because everyone's going to want basar for yantif, no problem at all. That's why. Otherwise, you're right. And b'sha'ar yemos hashana dechovu lo ein chavan lo ela b'fanav. So that's how the Gemara answers, based on the principle of zachan ladam shelo b'fanav ve'ein chavan lo adam ela b'fanav. Now, this aligns with our Gemara because these 4 days out of the year are special days where we treat halacha a little bit differently. Says Rav Nachman, for answer of our Gemara, why is it that Rabbi Eliezer says it's a kinyan? We treat this Eruv a little bit differently. It's not regular kinyanim. We go above and beyond to ensure that this Eruv can be made. And therefore, if we look back in the Mishnah where we started, we allow for the leniency that the chenvani, the store owner, can have in mind. This person, even though it's not matnas chinam, even though I gave money, and when he's being ma'arev, he's only in mind for matnas chinam, we'll let him be lenient here, as if there's a kinyan. Why? Because we're making an Eruv. It's a special day, just like the Dalid Prakim, it's a special day. Another possible answer, just about halfway down, says the Gemara, Rav Ila, Amar Rav Yochanan, he says, no, it's not correct. Your understanding of the Dalid Prakim is not right. Really, here's the proper understanding. The Dalid Prakim, these 4 days of year where we do force the shochet to shech, even if he doesn't want to, even if it's going to mean a potential financial loss for him, because let's say he only is going to sell 1 dinar worth of meat and not the rest of it, it's going to go bad by the time he can sell again. Still, we force his hand. Says the Gemara, how does Rabbi Yochanan understand? B'daled prakim elu he'emidu chachamim divrehen al divrei Torah. No, it's the opposite, is that we don't have any extra going on here at all. Whatever the din is, and what is the din? To Amar Rabbi Yochanan davar Torah ma'os konos. He says that ma'os are konos even without Mashiach. So this is where you can see the power of the machlokas going on in our Mishnah, which is that one track, it was the track of Rav Nachman following the Chachamim, is that we say there is no ma'os konos. Money cannot generate a transaction with metaltalin unless there is Mashiach. I can't buy something from you without doing a Maisa Kinyan. Not just money alone is not sufficient. This is the second approach. Umipnei ma amru Mashiach kona. Why midrabanan did we add on the stringency to do Mashiach with Maos? Medina, we don't need it. Ladina, we don't need it at all. It works. Answers the Gemara. Gzeira shema yomrulo nisrufu chiteich be'aliyah, because it would create a problem for the buyer. We were afraid that it was going to be a seller's market, and he would have the advantage by saying, "Oh, I know you gave me money. I'm so sorry. It burned up in my attic, so we're done." So we were concerned about that the buyer would be at a loss. So the Chachamim added a chumrah that it had to be done with a kinyan, and that way his das is much more shalom. How does this answer the question? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that ma'os are konos. So that's a totally different animal. Ma'os can be kona without a kinyan. The Chachamim were of the opinion that ma'os can only be kona with a kinyan, with a Mashiach. That's why they said it didn't work in our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer, according to the second answer of the Gemara, maybe he argues fundamentally with the Chachamim, and he holds not like Rav Nachman, he holds like Rabbi Yochanan, that Ladina, we paskin the ma'os are konos, and that's why our Mishnah makes sense according to Rabbi Eliezer. That brings us to, where are we? To the 2 dots, or a little bit more than halfway down, and we're going to get to the end of the parak, and then we're going to stop. And that is where we're up to right now. Let's continue. We said at the very top of this amud, the very first words, and quoted here in the 2 dots, Gzeira Shema Yomar Lo, next line, Umodim Bisha'ar Kol Ha'adam. We said that if it was anybody else, that we would then consider the kinyan to be just fine. Says the Gemara, who is that? Man sha'ar kol adam. Amar Rab, Bal Habayis, a regular house owner, not a store owner. V'chein Amar Shmuel, Bal Habayis, it's just a regular person. To Amar Shmuel, what does Shmuel say? Lo shanu ela nachtom. Our Mishnah, where we have the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about whether or not we assume that this transaction was enough. Rabbi Eliezer says yes. The Chachamim say no. That's only by a nachtom, by a baker. Aval Bal Habayis kone. When you give money to a Bal Habayis and then he's going to have in mind to be mezakeh for everybody, that works even if you paid money. Even without Mashicha. Amar Shmuel, not only that, Lo Shanu Elama, that's only true when you give over cash. However, Ela Kli, if I give you an item, that's different. That's different. The Kli will work according to everyone, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara about Kli Kone. Why does that work? Says Rashi, 12 lines from the bottom, an inch below where we are, Dibur Hamaschel Aval Kli, Kinyan Sudar. We're not talking about money anymore. When I give you a Kli in place of money, that is not a financial transaction. That is a Kinyan Sudar, a different type of mechanism that's employed here. One that we rely upon on the regular, but for another time. But here, that's why money is different, says Shmuel. So there too, there would be no machlokas, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, if what you gave over wasn't money, but was an item. So I'm going to give you my iPhone. Here it is. Take it. It's yours. Now please be ma'arev on my behalf. The Amar Shmuel, Shmuel also adds, Lo shanu, ela da Amar lo zachali. Also, it's only when you use the language of zacha, a language of please take care of me, but it's not a language of shlichus. However, aval, amar, arevli, if you say, we're going to bind ourselves, a stronger language. We have this by Nadarim all the time. You say, hare alai is different than saying hare zeh. Hare alai is, it's a burden on me. Arev li, then shliach shav yavikani. Once it's mamish a shlichus, you're just shlucho shaladim kamosu, you're nothing more than an extension of my hand, that's fine. So there Shmuel says as well, our Mishnah has the language of zacha. So that's where we have our machlokas. It has to be by a nachtom, it has to be with money, it has to be in a case where the person said zacha. But if we break any of those rules, if it's not the nachtom, it's a balabayis. If it's not money, but it's a kli. And if it's not going to be the language of zachali, but rather the language of arevli, in all of those cases, no machlokas, and the eruv would work just perfectly. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel paskins for us. Let's not get any names mixed up. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel was a 2nd century Amora. And what does he say? Halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says that we paskin in our Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda, who lived hundreds of years before him. Good. Not only that, says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, but Kol Makom Sheshana Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin. Anytime we are taught a halacha by the Tana Rabbi Yehuda in the world of Eruv halacha kamos, we paskin like him. Says the Gemara. Really? Amar le Rav Chana Bagdata. He was from Baghdad, and he said, the Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he says to the author of this idea, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, who says we always paskin like Rabbi Yehuda the Tana, afilu b'mavui shenitlo karosav alechayav. Even a shita, which we're going to see later in the Masechta, that if someone took from a mavui, a kore or a lechi, and look at Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom, Dibur Hamaschel Amar Shmuel afilu b'mavui shenitlo karosav. Rashi says there, b'Shabbos, he took it on Shabbos, demekel bo Rabbi Yehuda. B'perakol gagos, he says later, it's a daf tzadi something, tzadi test. There he says, Vamar mutarin laoso Shabbos. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda leniently like that. Really? Come on, that's a very big kula that we don't paskin like. So it says the Gemara 6, 7 lines from bottom. No. Amar lei be'eruvin amarti lach. Listen to the words I said. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said be'eruvin. You're talking about mechitzos. Velo be'mechitzos. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in that case. That's not a din in eruvin. That's a din in creating a mechitza. We're trying to create that 4th wall of a mavui, and it's insufficient if it's taken away on Shabbos. We do not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda by mechitzos. We do paskin like him by eruv. Amar le Rav Acha Berei Rav Ashi Halacha Michlal de Pligi. If you are telling me, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda the Tana, it implies that there's a dissenting opinion. Okay, the Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, that's not true, because Kol Makom Sha'amar Rav Yehuda Emasai Uvameh b'Mishnasenu. Whenever we have Rabbi Yehuda the Tana saying the language of Emasai, qualifying a Mishnah to say, when is this true? Or uvameh, b'med dvarim amurim, like we have in our Mishnah. Look at the 3rd line of our page. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, b'med dvarim amurim. So whenever we have Rabbi Yehuda the Tana saying emasai or uvameh, eino ela lefaresh divrei chachamim. It seems there that it's only to be mefaresh. So you, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, who said that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, you can't imply that there's a machlokas, because we have a rule that whenever Rabbi Yehuda says uvameh, like we have in our Mishnah, again 3 lines from the top, that it's just to be mefarish. Says the Gemara, okay, but velo pligi? How could you tell me that there is no dissenting opinion? I'll show you one. We learned yesterday or 2 days ago, I can't remember anymore. Nitosvu alehen mosif umezake v'tzarich lehodia. We have there in the Mishnah over there that when extra guests come, and at the same time, the Eruv dropped in its volume and you need to add more, we said that you have to be tzarech lehodia. But that's not always true. Why do you have to be tzarich lehodia? Our Mishnah says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, bein ladas, bein shelo ladas. So clearly the previous Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. So obviously, even though you want to say that our Mishnah says uvameh, and whenever that he says uvameh, it's just to be mafarish, it's clear from another Mishnah that somebody argues with Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara, Hasam, no, over there it's different. Over there it's bechatzer shebein shnei mavuos. Over there it's a unique case. That's why we have a dissenting opinion. But in general, there's no machlokas. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work either. V'ha'amar Rav Shezvi, amar Rav Chizda, zo someres. We saw this line explicitly. We just learned this. What did it say? What did Rav Chizda teach us? He taught us zo someres chaluken alav chaver al Rabbi Yehuda. We saw explicitly that there are people who don't agree with the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, how could you say that there's no machlokas? You want to say the machlokas is only in that narrow case, 2 lines from the bottom. It's not true. People don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, turning to the top of Pei Beis Amud Aleph, Ella Gavra Karami Swa. Come on, we have a machlokas Amoraim. We have Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, who says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and then we have Rav Chizda, who says that there's a machlokas. Maybe it's just a machlokas in the Amoraim about whether or not we say there's a machlokas within the Tana of Rabbi Yehuda. Why can't that be the case? Maybe it's not clear how we hold. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is either argued upon or not. And that's the machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, who says no, and Rav Chizda, who says yes. Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Pligu, Mar Savar Lo Pligu. Not everyone agrees. Some people say that yes, there's a bar plugta who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and some say there's no machlokas. So we conclude on that note. And one last sugya for the night. Gufa, let's go back to something we learned. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Whenever we see the line of Rabbi Yehuda where he qualifies a Mishnah by saying Emasai, when is this true, or Uvameh, like our Mishnah on the 3 lines from the top of Pei Aleph on the Beis Bamed Dvarim Mamur, and whenever he says that Eino Elo Lefaresh, that is Divrei Chachamim, that's a sheet of the Chachamim. The Rav Yochanan Amar Emasai Lefaresh, when a Mishnah qualifies with the word Emasai, it's only to explain, it's not to argue. And Uvameh, and when it says Uvameh Dvarim Amurim Lachlok, this would be in line with the Shita of Rav Chizda that we just saw, that yes, people think that Rav Yehuda has a bar plugta because our Mishnah says Uvameh, and here Rav Yochanan says Uvameh Lachlok. But says the Gemara, not asking on that point, both Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rav Yochanan agree that Emasai is Lefarish, that when Rav Yehuda says a qualification in a Mishnah of Emasai, when is this true? Both of them agree that it's Lefarish. They only argue by Bamed Dvarim Amur. But when they say Emasai, it's not meant to argue, it's only meant to explain. So says the Gemara, the Emasai Lefarishu, are you sure? I can show you a case where the word Emasai was used and it was not Lefarish. Here's where it is. Says the Gemara, 5-6 lines down. The Hatnan. Ve'elu hein hapsulin. Hope no gamblers are here tonight. Says the Gemara as follows: Ve'elu hein hapsulin. Here are the ones who are puzzle. This is a din derabanan, granted, but these are the people who are puzzle for edus miderabanan. Hamesachik bekubia, people who are going to play with dice. The hamalve beribis, people who are doing the isser of being malve beribis. Umafricha yonim, those who race animals of some kind. The sochrei shvius, people who are selling shvius. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Emasai. Rabbi Yehuda says, when is this true? And it's not to be mefarish. Bisman she'ein lo umnos elahi. When do we say that there's an isser derabanan? Not an isser derabanan. When do we say that you are puzzle for edus miderabanan? That's when it's your parnasa. That's your only job. You sit there and you mamish roll dice the whole day. That's how you have chicken races, pig races. So then fine. Aval yesh lo umnos shalohi. If you have a job other than that. So says Rabbi Yehuda, Harezeh Kasher. V'tani Allah bebrisa. We have a brisa that disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. And what does the brisa say? V'chachamim omrim bein she'ein lo umnos elahi uvein sheyesh lo umnos shelohi. Harezeh pasal. What do we see? We see the usage of the word emasai within the world of Rabbi Yehuda, and we see that he has a bar plugta. So not always is it true that when we see the word emasai that it's lefarish, because here in the case of the elu psulim, these people who have the psul derabanan, it's not always the case that they are going to agree, because Rabbi Yehuda says it's only true when it's your only job. But the Chachamim say it's true even if you have another job. So your principle has been upslugged. You can't say that that's true anymore, that we have to follow that the rule that Emasai is always Lefarish, not true. Answers the Gemara 5 lines before the parak ends. Hahid Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rabbi Tarfon. No, Rabbi Yehuda was just extending the sheet of Rabbi Tarfon. It wasn't his own shita. So the rule will still apply if Amosai is always lefarish for Rabbi Yehuda. But it's not true when he's quoting Rabbi Tarfon. What did Rabbi Tarfon say? Detanya, the Brisa writes. Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, Le'olam ein echad mehen nazir lefi she'ein nazirus elo lehafla'a. What's going on here? Let's give some background. Let's say that the two of us are sitting on a bench together. We see a man walking 100 feet away with just hair down to his toes. So you say, I bet you that I'm a nazir if he is a nazir. I'll bet you that I'm right. And the other person says, I'll bet you that I'm a nazir. I'll make myself a nazir if he isn't a nazir. You make a ridiculous bet like that. Now you don't know the answer. So when you say those words of I'll be a nazir if he is or isn't a nazir, it's unclear. So says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, in that case, if you say that Le'olam ein echad mehen nazir, both of us are not nazirim. Why? Lefi she'ein nazirus elo lehafla. If you're going to make a neder, it has to be a hafla. It has to be significant. It has to be clear that you want to be a nazir. If a person says about themselves that they want to be a nazir without the conditions of an unknown in the future, okay, then you're a nazir. But if we're looking out at this guy with long hair and guessing, I'll be a nazir if he is or isn't, that's not hafla. That's not enough to make you into a nazir. Alma, what do we see from Rabbi Tarfon? Since we're not sure if the guy with the long hair that we're looking at is in fact a nazir, lo meshabed nafshe. It wasn't your whole gestalt. You weren't totally into it. Therefore you're not going to be considered that person. You're not going to be a nazir. What about all the gambling we were talking about? Hachanami here too. Kevan delo yada ikani ilokani. Since we don't actually know how the dice are going to play out, we don't know which of the birds is going to win. We have no idea. I'll give you $10 if bird 1 wins, and I'll give you $5 if bird 2 wins. We don't know the end. So it says a very wild idea, says the Gemara, that really, ikani ilokani, we don't know, de lo yada. So then says the Gemara, lo gamar umakne. That then it's as if you didn't do anything. This is why the poskim write that gambling is problematic. Here's the lumdus behind it. If in fact a person gambles and it's their parnasa, so then here's what's happening. You're playing a game of cards, and you put down money that you're expecting card X to turn over. You don't know if that's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. That's not a kinyan. So even if you agree, I put my money on the table and you put your money on the table, we agree that whatever happens, happens, and you get my money. So according to some people, that's called an asmachta. That type of financial agreement is an asmachta. It's an unknown. And you can't take my money. It's gneva. You can't take my money. So that's why some of the poskim are very makbid on things like that are interpersonal, where you're gambling with one other person. If it's against the house, is it any different? Okay, can discuss that. But interpersonal might be a little bit different because of this idea that Rabbi Tarfon extends here, that I'll just read it again, the last line of the Gemara, hachanami, by gambling, I won't know if I'm going to win till it's over already, lo gamaru makne, then I'm not really going to be makne you my money, and then if you take it, it would be gneva. So that's how the Gemara explains this last piece, that really, going back to where we started with this final sugya, that really the language of Amosai still can be lefaresh according to Rabbi Yehuda, because in this case, when it was used, it was in the name of Rabbi Tarfon. We'll stop here at the end of the parak. Hadran Allah chalon, hadran Allah chalon, hadran Allah chalon, hiratzon. We should be zoche to be together again in 7.5 years to relearn this parak yet again. The happiest of birthdays to Mark Halpert.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Speaking of birthdays,